Thank you very much, and very nice to be with you all from southwest France. I live in the Cathar area of France, which is very interesting historically, as some of you may know. And what I'm going to do this evening is just sort of take a quick tour through the books I've written on survival and death. So I'm going to take you through three of my books just in very brief detail and give you a bit of biographical background as well. And then I'm going to say something about the Scientific and Medical Network and about the Galileo Commission. So survival, this is the book here, and the new edition. This is my first book, and I wrote it over the summer holidays when I was teaching at Winchester College, which is an extraordinary institution going back to 1382. I taught languages and philosophy, sort of general studies, and I could actually choose the books that my pupils were going to study. And I've actually my new book's been endorsed by three of the scholars that I taught. One of whom is a professor of philosophy, another is a well-known writer, another is a writer and actor. And so these are all people who I used to invite round to talk about important things in life by candlelight. And so survival, the question I was asking myself, and so I wrote this book when I was 30, and so it's a long time ago, is, does something happen after death or nothing? And so what I did is first part of the book looks at the history of philosophy and scientific ideas and asks, what did people think? From indigenous cultures onwards, thought through the Greeks and right way through mainly Western thought, but I brought in some important Eastern and Indian philosophers as well. And then I have a chapter on Swedenborg, who was very important to me because I discovered him when I was still at university. And three of the essays in my new book are my presidential addresses to the Swedenborg Society about 20 years ago, one of which is on Kant and Swedenborg. And Kant was very rude about Swedenborg, as you might know. He wrote a book called Dreams of a Spirit Seer, in which he didn't even pay Swedenborg the compliment of spelling his name right. And yet he was intrigued by what Swedenborg's experiences represented, but he couldn't bring himself to admit publicly that they were significant. Now, this is obviously very much the same thing that happens with professional philosophers today. There's kind of professional shame. They haven't got the courage of their convictions to say what they really think, because they think their colleagues will think they're mad. It's a frequent syndrome. And then I've got a sort of central chapter on psychology, logic, and evidence, because the evidence you look at and the way you look at it depends on what your presuppositions are and what your assumptions are. And what I now call the central dogma of neuroscience is that the brain gives rise to consciousness. And if you hang on to this idea, then a lot of the areas that we're interested in are simply inexplicable. A materialist view has no explanatory power at all, and so we need to look at this quite rigorously. Then I've got chapters on apparitions, out-of-body experiences, near-death experiences, and post-mortem descriptions of death. And one of the interesting cases I have in that last chapter, and then I have my conclusions, was Rosemary Brown channeling Bertrand Russell. And I don't know how many of you have seen this case history. It's a very, very interesting one, because obviously Russell was an atheistic materialist during his lifetime, and he would have not thought much of anybody talking about surviving consciousness, surviving death. And yet his description, or the description purporting to come from him, is one of the most articulate, as you would expect, descriptions of the death process that I've read anywhere. And he says that he realizes that people may not take him seriously and won't believe that it is I, Bertrand Arthur William Russell, who am speaking. And he describes what his perception is like. And he says, well, it's quite understandable that the reality in which you currently are, you might assume this was the only reality there was, and which is, of course, what he assumed during his lifetime. And so this is an interesting case. And so what I was making the case for is that for the existence of the soul, effectively, and that you cannot account for these case histories and material. I didn't talk much about laboratory parapsychology in that book, but I took more of a legal approach, as Victor does. And you can't account adequately for the range of evidence unless you postulate the possibility of survival of consciousness in some form. So that was the first book, and it came out in 1984. As it happened, I was attending the Mystics and Scientists Conference, which I've been organizing for decades now, but as a delegate. And I sat next to Eileen Campbell, who was the editor at Routledge and Keegan Paul. She said, "Oh, send me the manuscript." So I did, and she sent it to Colin Wilson. And Colin Wilson was very kind about it. And so that's how it got published. So that was the first book. The second book I used to be called Hole in One, WHOLE in One, and it's called Life Review and the Near-Death Experience, Resonant Mind. Now this is where we go more into philosophy and ethics, because the question I'm asking here is what happens in terms of post-mortem judgment, karma and reincarnation. And there's a huge literature in Christianity, for instance, in the Old Testament, New Testament, about the Last Judgment, eschatology as it's called, the last things, death, resurrection, and death, judgment, resurrection, and the future life. And there are different views in the New Testament. So I talk about Paul's view, and then the theologians' views as they're progressed. But you have in there, some of you may know some of the great medieval cathedrals in France, and nearly all of them have the Last Judgment on the west portal. And this was a really frightening spectre for our medieval forebears, because they were terrified by the church. In fact, the COVID tactics of governments were used by the church a long time ago, and they're to terrify the congregations into compliance. And they said, if you don't buy your ticket by belonging to the church, then you won't be able to get to heaven, and you'll probably go to hell. And so updating this, and then Swedenborg had his own ideas on this, because he said that he had an idea that there was a last judgment, sort of balanced the books, as it were, in 1757, which I don't write very much about. But he said that the light, there was a form of life review, and then I look at the near-death experience, the life review and the near-death experience, and I distinguish two levels of it. I distinguish what I call panoramic memory, where there's no emotional processing of what you're looking at, from the life review proper, which where there's an emotional involvement. Somebody's shuffling paper, and there's an emotional involvement, and this is the critical thing to understand, you experience the event, whatever it is you're reviewing, you experience this from multiple perspectives. It might be primarily the perspective of the immediate person who was involved, but it could be going more widely than that, so that each person experiences. I mean, if we take this meeting as an example, we have 39 people here, so there are 39 different experiences of the same event. And if you were to understand what the event was in its totality, if you wanted to understand that, then you would need to experience it from everybody's point of view, which would be quite startling. But what I didn't fully realize at the time, but I would reframe things slightly if I were to write it completely again, is the idea of the one mind. And since that time, I've read a lot of new thought, starting with Emerson's idea of the oversoul, and then progressing through Ralph Waldo Trine, Thomas Troward, and other of the new thought thinkers. There are too numerous to mention, but I'm going to do a course next year to explain some of these basic ideas. And so that we are connected through what I call empathetic resonance. And in life, this Rupert Sheldrake's done a certain amount of work on this. This means that you can telesomatically feel. Tele is distant and soma is the body. This is what Ian Stevenson and Larry Dossey call it. It's what it's like to be someone else. But in particular, if you're close to them. And this Rupert would say this is morphic resonance. And so this is an extraordinary phenomenon from a kind of materialist point of view, because there's no doubt this is very well attested, so much so that people at great distances are also able to feel experiences of people close to them. And I have a lot of examples of this. And I also talk about psychometry and the way that the object reading seems to work in a similar kind of empathetic way. And so in the life review, what's happening is you're feeling by empathetic resonance on the basis of the one mind, how these experiences affected everybody else, and you then draw some lessons from that. This is the important point. And then I look at the same phenomenon described post-mortem. And if you look at the phenomenology, just the patterns, or in these experiences, but whether near death or post-mortem, exactly the same thing is happening. So, and I look at various spiritual teachers, Peter Dunoff, I'm going to come on to, and Steiner, and various teachers have talked about this. And I think it's an absolutely essential piece of human knowledge, or knowledge about life. Because if we were told, as Peter Dunoff expresses it, that at the end of our lives, we're going to be examined on how we apply the law of love, then we'd know what we should be doing. And we would also know what we should not be doing. Because the point is that if we are all expressions of the same universal mind, then what we do, in inverted commas, to someone else, we're actually doing to ourselves. And we will experience this in due course. And there are certain things that I'm not particularly looking forward to experiencing in my own case, for the suffering that I know I've created for other people, particularly my children, when I got divorced. But that's you have to see these things in the round, and so if you look at what the real lessons from this book, the on near-death experiences, and I look at reincarnation as well, then they really amount to what the purpose. This is my own view, but it's quite a considered view. Is that we're here to learn to love and to grow in wisdom. And at the end of the book, I go through the whole history of Western thought and ethics. And at the end of the book, I have a chapter called Ethics, Interconnectedness and Responsibility. So it's what I call an ethic of interconnectedness. And I coined this term in 1990. Nobody uses it, but it's the one I use. And it's based again on the one mind, and the ethical imperative of the one mind is the golden rule, that you do unto others what you would like done to yourself. You don't do to others what you wouldn't like done to yourself. Now, you mentioned Jürgen Ziewer earlier on, and he's got a very striking case in one of his books of a review of a Muslim who'd blown up quite a number of people and thought that they were doing the right thing and they were going to go into a Muslim heaven. And of course, it's a huge mistake. And of course, you don't learn that necessarily until you come face to face with these implications in the next life, in the invisible. And so my hypothesis, and I still believe this very strongly, is that if people knew this was the deal, this is how life works, these are the ethical dynamics of life, then they would not only seek not to harm other people, but to seek to do as much good as possible while they're here. So you devote yourself to others, as Peter Dunoff would say. Love is life for the whole. Love is life for the whole. And here he is. This is my book, Profit for Our Times, which was reprinted in 2015 with a forward by Wayne Dyer. And that actually, I'll just tell you a little story about Wayne Dyer because it's quite interesting. So I'm driving to a meeting in Scotland, and I'm listening to Wayne Dyer's CD on divine love, which is very good, incidentally. And as I'm going across the bridge, he suddenly starts talking about Peter Dunoff. I think, goodness, I didn't realize he knew about him. And he tells the story that he was in St. Louis, and someone who happened to be a friend of mine, in fact, went to the lecture. I heard this from the other end as well, from Phyllis. Went to the lecture, and at the end of the lecture, she went up to Wayne Dyer and gave him a copy of my book. And on the cover was a picture of Peter Dunoff. And he said, good heavens, this is the person who's been appearing in my dreams for the last few weeks. So there's more in heaven and earth. And there is a sequel to this, but it's not really particularly relevant at the moment. Unfortunately, he died before he was going to help promote this book. So Profit for Our Times, and Peter Dunoff, let me just tell you a very little about him. Bain Saduno is his spiritual name. He was one of the great sages of the last several hundred years, in my view. He was Bulgarian, and he lived from 1864 to 1944, so he lived practically through 2 world wars. And he was a musician. He wrote 200 songs, and he also wrote he choreographed the Panurithmy, which is a sacred dance, symbolic sacred dance. He wrote music for it. This morning, I did the first 12 movements in my garden. I always do them on a Sunday morning. And they're incredibly beautiful, with their beautiful movements like giving and ascending. Difficult to do it on a small screen. And so he developed this during the 1930s. And I read a lot of Swedenborg in my 20s, and he regarded Swedenborg as a good preparation for understanding his work, because Swedenborg's main principles were love and wisdom, divine love and wisdom. He wrote a book of that title. And the 5 principles of Dunoff are love, wisdom, truth, justice, and goodness or virtue. And these form a pentagram. I have a pentagram around my neck with the actual principles in very small lettering. And what he said, which is so true for our time, I think, is that, spirituality is not a matter of belief systems. It's a matter of embodying principles. And these principles are universal. The principles of love, the principle of wisdom, the principle of truth. And those are the ones he talked about most. And so everything comes back to love, wisdom, and truth, including the movements of the Panurithmy, because the love and the love is the left and the feminine, right is the wisdom and the masculine. And these have to work together so that you can move forward in truth. That's the kind of symbolic understanding. So he left several thousand lectures. I learned Bulgarian in order to be able to read some of these in the original. And I translated his prayers, which I use every day. And I use them in Bulgarian mainly. And then I sing some of his songs. I sing at least one song on my morning walk. So I'm really tuned into this. And his vision of the future, and you might ask how many decades or hundreds of years it's going to take, was a culture of love. And I talk about a culture of love and wisdom. And that, for me, constitutes a compass direction. So that's my orientation. I don't necessarily expect these things to arrive in this lifetime, but I'm sure that this is the direction, the evolutionary direction of travel of humanity. If we can get out of what looks like increasingly an impasse of transhumanist technocracy, where we're expected to the biological and the digital so the machine and the human are supposed to merge, and that I find not a very edifying prospect. but it's a very real one, and it's being advanced by the current situation, and indeed the technology that we're using, but we're using it in a very good way. And so this book it's an introduction to his life, and it's also it gives you a good many extracts on the thematized extracts from his work, so that you can work with this, or you can just open it at random and see what comes up. Let's just try that, see what happens. So here we are. The subconscious contains the life of the past. Human experiences are stored there. And so this is about the structure of the mind. And let's just try one more. The sun. Light is a sign of love. When the sun shines on us, that shows that God is sending us light. Physical light is a sign of God's love. Beautiful thought. So that's Dunov. So now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to share my screen. I don't want the Zoom post expansion. Let's see where we are. It's Home Scientific Medical Network. And I'm going to go back, share screen. So this is our new site. And I joined the network, as I say, in 1983. And I was teaching at Winchester College, which was founded in 1382. And I think I may have said that already. I didn't know about the network, but when I first went to talk to George Blaker, who happened to be in the same school as I was at, after about 10 minutes, he said, "You're just the person we're looking for to run the network." And I actually realized I had this sort of moment of recognition. This is true. So let me just tell you a little bit of this. This is our Beyond the Brain and Mystics and Scientists coming up quite soon. I know we had a glitch earlier on today about I'm just going to minimize here so you can see. I can see a bit more. So this coming week we have weekly webinars, and so this is Soul Midwifery with Felicity Warner, and then we have 3 events for members a week. We have a meditation, which I was just attending this evening, and then a dialogue tomorrow, and then we have a virtual bar on a Friday. But I think that's probably I think it's going to work for people. Certainly, not everybody's in Australia tonight, but it won't work for people in Australia. And that I find an extraordinarily interesting evening. This Friday we were talking about free will, and so it's a place where you can experience or share your experiences with like-minded people. This is Sir Roger Penrose, honorary member, who won the Nobel Prize last year. Book of the week, that's Federico Fagin. This is he wrote an extraordinary book on his experience and theories of consciousness. It's called Silicon. So do think of that. I'm just working on the newsletter. Unfortunately, the content I put in disappeared from the Teams folder, so I've got to do it again. Let me just show you go to our events page, the webinars. So see that Soul Midwifery coming up. Events calendar. Okay, so what's happened is we have got a glitch, I think, because everything seems to webinars. Let's see. Something set itself for this week. Here we are. 1, 2. Erica Elliott. That's next week. She's the author of this Medicine and Miracle in the High Desert, extraordinary book, which I reviewed a few years ago. And then Mystics and Scientists is coming up, connecting with nature. And then also Beyond the Brain, Science and the Sacred, that's our course of Ravi Ravindra. And that's why there are four pages to that. I'll have to find out. And then there's Beyond the Brain, which should come up. Here we go. That's at the end of the year. And we also have these. I'll tell you about the Galileo summits when I get there. And then Paradigm Explorer, I've been editing this since 1986. I've done 100 and something issues. So this is the latest issue here, which is a picture of a cherry tree up from where I am. And then we have some honorary members: Anne Baring, Larry Dossey, Ivan Laszlo, Ravi, Ravindra, and what they kindly say about Paradigm Explorer: Rupert Sheldrake, Elizabeth Sartorius, Marilyn Schlitz. So I think you might find that worthwhile. And if you go to, I'll give you our special offer. If you go to and join up, then if you put Mystics50 into your coupon code, you get a discount of £10 if that appeals to you. So let me come out of that, and you can ask me about that. But we've increased our membership by 430 people this year, which is about a 60% increase in membership. So we really are sort of recovering our momentum. So let me just go back, and I'm going to open up I'm going to close this one, open the Galileo Commission, and then I'll show you that. Oh, it's just loading. Okay, accept cookies. Right. So let's share again. Here we go. So you'll see we've got a telescope in here. And the reason we have a telescope is that there are parallels between their professor of philosophy at Padua not wanting to look through Galileo's telescope, and materialist scientists refusing to look at evidence which might call into question scientific materialism. And this is very, very powerful, and it's very difficult for us to make much headway when the consensus is so strong and the technological Silicon Valley agenda is towards materialistic transhumanism. And this afternoon, I was listening to a brilliant interview with Peter Breggin, Breggin, and Miklos Lukács, who's a Peruvian philosopher, and his explanation of transhumanism is absolutely brilliant. And so this is, we're trying to expand the scope of science beyond a materialistic worldview. If you know any students who might go in for our essay prize, it's quite valuable. And then you can see me talking about how it started. And then I'll just go to the other. So the report, one version of the report is the big version, which has all the references. So, but what you can do is you can go down to your layman's report, which is in simpler language. Then you can go to summary of the argument in multiple languages, and let's just go there. And this is a useful place to start, because the internet seems to be a bit slow. Is it not loading? Doesn't seem to want to load the. Oh, there we are. So purchase summary done, and then how it all started. And then there's introductions here, and then Harold Ballach, the preface, forward by Ian McGilchrist. I don't know how many of you know Ian McGilchrist's work. He's absolutely phenomenal. And his new book of 600,000 words is coming out in Matter with Things, it's called, coming out in November. And then if you want to join us, which you're very welcome to do, then you can join, there we are, 969 members. You can join as a professional affiliate or an academic, or a friend if you're just interested. And then it tells you about steering committee advisors. So we've got 100 original advisors and partners, and you can see we've got another, so about 600 people are friends. So I've got 300 more professional affiliates. And so this is our, oh yes, friends 554 315. So this is an outreach of the network, to do with the science of consciousness, and we're trying to expand the scope of science and the science of consciousness beyond the materialistic worldview. And what we're trying to do at the moment is we're looking very seriously at a communication strategy where we try and boil the message down for different audiences, because people are not going to read immensely long books. Our next Galileo Summit, incidentally, is for the launch of Consciousness Unbound, which is the 3rd volume from the University of Virginia in Esalen. And we've got all the authors lined up to talk on round tables. And we've got one of the round tables is going to be the last one. I think it's going to be chaired by John Cleese, which should be quite entertaining. John is interested in this kind of thing. So now, finally, my book. This is my new book, Quest for Wisdom. It's 25 essays. Let me just take you to I'll just open my own website, and then that's probably the best way of showing you that. .co.uk. So let me share that one. Designed by my daughter. Right, so where's that gone? Here. Right. Share. So this is actually the Pyrenees down here. So you can see that I've done a lot of podcasts in the last year, and this is my book, Inspiring Purpose on the Path of Life. There are links to my various podcasts. And these are the webinars. So if you go here, you can find out more about the webinars, which are also recorded. And then I've got projects. These are they're various things: the Scientific Medical Network, Paradigm Explorer, and then Inspiring Purpose. I do this program for young people, which is a template, and these are the various versions that we've done. The current one is this for Sustainable Futures, and then my books, events, and so on. So that just gives you a little snapshot, so you can go and find out more about that. The essays themselves are divided into the human search for meaning and spirituality and meaning, and then the sort of consciousness section, and then finally quite a long section on ethics and responsibility, essays on Albert Schweitzer and Dag Hammarskjöld and various other people. So I'll stop there so that we can make some time for discussion.
David, I could listen to you all day. I'm so envious of those students of yours. I could just imagine those candlelight discussions that you had in that college. I mean, what an education for them, discussing the meaning of life and everything. Question I'd like to ask is, you were destined from a family point of view for a career in merchant banking, and you actually did it for 2 years, I understand.
Yes, I did. Yes.
What was it? How did you get from there to being interested in spirituality? Because obviously it wasn't something that came from your family background, and particularly interested in the afterlife. What was it that?
Well, it did come from the family background in one respect, in that my mother was sensitive, and so she had a variety of experiences which she would tell me about, and so I started thinking about those and what that really meant for human capacities, if you like. And so that, and then I had an honorary grandmother who I could also talk about these things to, and so I used to go and spend the weekend with her from this merchant banking place. And I suppose a lot of people, I go back for some sort of old boys dinner, and a lot of my contemporaries have spent their careers in finance. But I realized it just wasn't my blueprint to do that. And so I pressed the eject button after 2 years. And then and the rest of since then, I've been dedicated my life to education in different forms. So I've I think that if you pay attention to the signs in your life and the timing of things and the opportunities that come up, then you can find your calling and then get yourself onto the right track. At least that's my experience.